let's bring out the man you've been waiting for, Mr. Stanley! We're also going to bring out here Stan's partner, guild champion, part of POW Entertainment. He'll be answering a few questions too. That's it.
Todd, if you can't say something nice about somebody.
All right, Stan and I are going to have as much fun here going through his life, hopefully giving you a little bit of insight to some of the things you may not know. So let's see if we can get to the very beginning of it. Obviously, Stan, you are an elderly gentleman today, but that wasn't always so. So let's take us back in time. Each one of us...
Wait, before you do that, I am roasting in this jacket, but I had to wear it because in case I get amnesia, I see Excelsior.
Yeah, turn on the back.
Around backwards to be able to read your name.
If Donald Trump can have a tower named after him, then Stanley can have a jacket with his name on it.
And this jacket is very subtle in case we forget the name of the company. It's POW.
Okay, Stan, so let's go back.
The advertising part.
Stan, we have a lot of aspiring artists, people who have wanted to break in, those of us who have broken in. So let's go back. How did Stan Lee get into comic books?
See, he doesn't speak that intelligently, so I thought I would give expressions to help you understand what the guy is saying. I also... What was the question? How did I get into comic books?
Look, all of us at some point, I was fortunate enough to get into this business, right? You've done a heck of a job doing it, but I know that there are literally hundreds of people here that would like to break into this business. You have a story, just like all of us, so give us how you tripped into this business, or was it that it was a straight line and you just needed to be into it?
The only thing is, I don't think my story would help anybody because it all happened purely by accident.
Right, that's what we want to hear.
I had a cousin who owned a publishing company. Actually, it was my cousin's husband, whom I hardly knew. But somebody told me they had an opening in his publishing company. They were looking for a guy who could write. And they published pulp magazines and men's magazines and girly magazines and comics. I didn't know what department needed somebody, but a job is a job. I was 17 years old. So I went up there and I found out there was an opening in the comic book department. It wasn't a big department. It consisted of Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. And I walked in and I found out that my job was to be like, well, an office boy would have been too glamorous. I was some kind of, went down and got them sandwiches. I filled their ink wells, stuff like that. They used ink in those days. And that's how I got started. So the only help that story will be to you is if any of you have a wife's cousin who has a publishing business and they're looking for something. That's about the best I can do.
And then so talk to us about getting regular work at that point, because besides being the gopher at the office to start with, at some point the trigger has to come that you have more value to them doing regular work than just being an office gopher. So what was some of the first work that you had?
I don't think they ever thought I had any better value. What happened is, now this is very technical, and it may be hard for some of you to grasp, so listen closely. In those days, every comic book publisher wanted his comic book to be called a magazine, because if it was known as a magazine, they got a cheaper postal rate. So when they sent the books out to subscribers, it didn't cost as much. In order for it to be called a magazine, it had to have 2 pages of text. Not panels, 2 pages of writing. Now, nobody in those days who read a comic wanted to read 2 pages of text. Most of those people couldn't read anyway. So somebody had to write the 2 pages of text. And since it was something that nobody read, they asked me to write it because nobody was going to read it anyway. So my first job was writing 2 pages of text. And there I was, 17 years old. My story came out. It was a Captain America story, all in words, no panels. But it's said by Stan Lee. I want to tell you, I showed it to everybody. Look, I'm a writer. I'm a professional. But I couldn't say that too much because Joe Simon and Jack Kirby were saying, run down and get us our sandwiches. Anyway, that's how it started. And that was the question. I never remember his questions because he talks so much and he rambles. And so, I want to apologize. I wanted to get a real celebrity to do this introduction. They all turned me down. No, I love this one. This bad.
Okay,
have fun with people you love.
So let's talk Stan. For some of the people who don't know, although we all have grown up with the name Stan Lee, tell them about what your real name is, and because that's just a stage name, right? Let's just break the magic here. Talk to them about your real name and why you changed it.
Notice how he talks. He used to be a baseball pitcher. Can't forget. Anyway, my name, I used to have a real name, not something silly like Stanley. It used to be Stanley Martin Lieber, a real name. And I used that all my life, but then when I started writing comics, people knew, the reason I signed Stan Lee was people had no respect for comics in those days. They didn't consider them an art form. They thought they were things that were read by dumb adults or moronic children, or nobody had any respect for comics. I'll tell you a story. I've told this before. If you've heard it before, read a book or something. It only take a couple of minutes. I would be at a party somewhere, and somebody would walk over to me and say, "What do you do?" And I didn't want to tell them. So I'd say, "I'm a writer," and I'd walk away. But they'd follow me, because, see, I'm a very fascinating person, and they didn't want to leave me alone. And they would say, no, what do you write? I still tried to evade the question. I'd say, "I write things for kids," and I walked away. Well, what kind of things? Eventually, I had to say comic books. Then they would turn around and walk away, and I wouldn't see them again. Today, it's different. Today, somebody says, "Hey, isn't that Stan Lee over there? Excuse me, President Obama. I'll be back in a minute." And then I run away. Do you know why? It's all because of you. You made the comic books what they are, so thank you very much. I mean, Obama may be annoying, but thank you.
Okay, let's see if we can turn this...
Oh, and that's why I changed my name. I didn't want to use... I forgot the question. I didn't want to use the name Stanley Martin Lieber on these dumb comics. So I called myself Stan Lee, but after a while, everybody knew me as Stan Lee, but my credit cards, years later, said Stanley Martin Lieber. So I'd go to a store to charge something, and I'd give them the card. They'd say, "Wait a minute, aren't you Stan Lee? What's this phony card you're giving me?" And it got so complicated that finally my wife and I decided, let's just change it to Lee. So now we're Joan Lee and Stan Lee, and I still like Stanley Martin Lieber better. But when I sign autographs, this makes it easier. I think I have answered that as completely, as coherently, and as boringly as you could ever answer a question.